Okay, so we're diving into something pretty interesting today, right? The Meghalaya state budget.
Yeah, for the financial year 2025-26. It was presented, I think, on March 5th, if I remember right,
March 5th, 2025.
2025. So pretty recent
Very recent.
and gives us a lot to unpack.
It does, and our main source here is the budget speech itself. It's a pretty comprehensive document.
It's quite detailed.
It is, and I think, for our listeners, our goal is to really cut through all that detail and try to pull out the significant insights, maybe some of the aha moments.
Right. Give them the big picture,
Exactly.
without overwhelming them with too much detail.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that struck me, just looking at this initially is the emphasis on citizen participation.
Yeah.
In the budget preparation process. They talk about these pre-budget consultations with various stakeholders.
Yeah, and it seems like they really tried to get input from a variety of different groups, which is encouraging.
It is. And they even say that this budget is, I think they use the phrase, by the people, of the people, and for the people.
Right. That is a direct quote.
It is. And that suggests to me that they're trying to align the budget with the community's hopes and aspirations.
Yeah, it seems like they're really trying to make it relevant to people's lives, not just a bunch of numbers.
Exactly. On
a page.
Yeah. And they talk about this vision they have called Meghalaya Mission 10.
Yes, Mission 10.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's really tied to their vision for 2032, which is their Diamond Jubilee of statehood.
Okay.
And they have some, pretty ambitious goals.
Okay.
They want to become a $10 billion economy by 2028.
Yeah.
And by 2032, they want to be among the top 10 states in per capita GDP and in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs.
Okay. That's a pretty,
It's a big goal.
a pretty big goal.
Yeah. So Mission 10 is kind of their action plan to achieve that. It's focused on 10 key opportunity sectors for growth and employment, and then 10 kind of core commitments.
Got it. And it sounds like this Mission 10, again, wasn't just something that they, came up with in isolation.
Right.
That the budget speech
directly connect
really emphasized
those consultations, the citizen input to how they shaped Mission 10 and how that led to the budget priorities.
Fascinating.
It's quite interesting, actually.
It is. And it's worth noting, too, that all this is happening alongside, ongoing consultations and discussions with the 16th Finance Commission.
Now, for those who might not be, super familiar with the inner workings of Indian public finance, can you just give us a quick...
Yeah, happy to. So the Finance Commission, basically, they recommend how...
The tax revenues that are collected by the central government are shared with the states.
Okay.
So that's often referred to as tax devolution.
Okay.
And this is really important for states like Meghalaya because it's a major source of their funding.
Got it. So Meghalaya is, actively engaging with the Finance Commission.
Oh, yeah. They submitted a massive 250-page memorandum to the commission, detailing kind of their whole development journey, their priorities, the challenges they face, all to kind of inform the commission's decisions for the next 5-year period, 2026 to 2031.
Okay. So they're really thinking long-term here.
Very strategic.
They are. And the budget speech even touches on some of the past, challenges. They talk about this period between 2010 and 2018.
Yes.
Which they characterize as one of financial constraint.
Right. Basically, the state just didn't have as much money to invest in things like infrastructure, education, healthcare.
And so that limited their ability to really make progress.
Yeah, and their economic growth during that period was actually slower than the rest of the Northeast region.
Oh, interesting.
And they even point out that their progress in reducing poverty was also slower compared to some of their neighbors.
Okay.
Like Assam.
Okay. So that kind of sets the stage, right? We have this period of constraint. And then it seems like things have really shifted since 2018.
Yeah, there's been a real turnaround.
They call it a reversal of fortunes.
Right.
What happened? What changed?
Well, a big factor has been this increase in public investments.
Okay.
And it's coming from a mix of sources.
Okay.
They're getting more from the central government through tax devolution.
Yeah.
They've also been able to increase their own tax revenue.
Okay.
And then they're getting more from centrally sponsored schemes, which are those initiatives that are, funded by the national government.
Got it.
They've also been, getting more from externally aided projects.
Okay.
And then there are some newer state-specific schemes like SAS.
SASCI. Now, what is that?
Oh, right. Sorry. SASI stands for State Annual Sectoral Capital Investment.
Okay.
And it's basically a way for the state to get more funding from the central government.
Okay.
But it's kind of merit-based.
Okay.
So the state has to meet certain performance criteria in key sectors to get that funding.
So they're being rewarded
to
good performance.
Exactly.
And that's allowed them to secure some pretty substantial funds, right?
Yeah, they've been able to use that funding for some major capital projects.
Wow. Okay, so they've really turned things around.
They have.
Even with the whole COVID disruption.
Yeah, and they acknowledge that the pandemic did have an impact.
Of course.
But they've been really focused on kind of streamlining their finances, improving governance, and just making sure those investments keep happening.
Yeah. And they talk about progress in some sectors being more visible, right? Like health.
Yeah, health, tourism, those have seen some pretty immediate improvements.
Okay.
But then there are other areas like agriculture, nutrition, education, where the changes take longer.
Sure.
But they seem committed to working on all of the sustainable development goals.
That's good. So I'm curious, kind of underlying all these efforts, is there sort of a distinct Meghalaya model?
Well, they do articulate a model based on 4 main pillars. So the first one is strengthening traditional community institutions. The second is making direct investments in citizens. The third one is leveraging technology. And the fourth one is forging partnerships.
Partnerships.
At various levels.
So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach.
Right.
And I'm particularly intrigued by this focus on traditional community institutions.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So they specifically talk about supporting cooperatives, individual entrepreneurs, and communities directly. And they actually have a very strong tradition of community-based organizations, like village employment councils and village health councils. And they're really relying on those organizations to help deliver programs.
Interesting. So it's not just top-down.
No, it's very grassroots.
It's very grassroots. So let's get into some of the specifics now. The budget.
Yeah.
The numbers.
The nitty-gritty.
The nitty-gritty. So we know their target is this $10 billion economy by 2028.
Right.
But where are they starting from? What's the baseline?
Well, when the current government, the MDA 2.0 government, when they came into office in 2023, the state's GSDP, which is the gross state domestic product, was around 42,697 crore. That's their starting point. The approved GSDP for this current financial year, 2023-24, is 53,057 crore.
And they're projecting that it will be 66,645 crore by 2025-26.
Okay, that's a pretty significant jump.
Yeah, that's an annual growth rate of 12.7%.
Wow.
Which puts them on track to reach that $10 billion goal.
Depending on exchange rates and all that.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay, so they're growing. Yeah. They're on an upward trajectory.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to fuel this growth, where is the money coming from?
Well, they have a few key sources of revenue. So one big chunk is central transfers, which includes their share of central taxes. And that's projected to be around 20,568 crore in 2025-26. Then they have their own tax revenue, which has actually been growing quite a bit. It's almost tripled since 2017-18. And they're expecting it to reach 4,226 crore in 2025-26. And that mainly comes from GST, taxes on sales and trade, and excise duties. And then there's revenue from non-tax sources like mining.
Oh, that's been a bit more unpredictable in the past. Partly because of court judgments and the whole transition to scientific mining. But they're optimistic. They're issuing new mining licenses. And they're projecting that non-tax revenue will be around 797 crore in 2025-26.
So it's a diversified revenue base.
Yes, definitely.
They're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
And on the spending side, what's the total estimated expenditure?
So for 2025-26, it's a pretty hefty sum.
Okay.
It's 30,003 crore.
Wow.
And that's actually triple what it was 8 years ago.
Okay. That's a big increase.
It is.
So how is that broken down?
So 23,353 crore of that is for state-level spending.
Okay.
And then 6,650 crore is for centrally sponsored schemes.
Okay.
And if you look at the type of spending, 20,556 crore is for revenue expenditure, which is like your day-to-day operating costs. Right. And then a big chunk, 9,447 crore, is allocated for capital expenditure.
Okay. And capital expenditure is more about long-term investments, right?
Exactly. Things like infrastructure, building assets for the future.
Okay. And that's a pretty substantial amount, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually increased sevenfold.
Wow.
Since 2017-18.
So they're really putting a lot of emphasis on
building for the future, definitely.
Okay, good. So now let's really dig into this Mission 10.
Okay.
It's about these 10 opportunities for growth.
Right.
The first one being investment promotion and private sector development.
Yes.
What's the strategy there?
So their goal is to attract around 8,500 crore in private investment.
Okay.
And they're using this thing called the Meghalaya Industrial and Investment Promotion Policy.
Okay.
MIPP.
MIPP.
For sure. This was launched in 2024.
Okay.
And it's aligned with the national government's UNADI scheme.
Okay.
And it offers a bunch of different incentives to attract investors.
Okay. But are they just trying to attract any investment?
No. They're very focused on creating jobs.
Okay.
For local people.
Okay. How are they doing that?
So the MIPP actually has specific requirements for local employment.
Okay.
So within 3 years of starting operations, any industrial unit has to fill 90% of their non-managerial positions and 50% of managerial roles with local people.
Okay, so they're really trying to make sure that these new investments benefit.
Yeah, they're not just giving away tax breaks and incentives without any strings attached.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they've even set up a specific authority for this.
Yeah, they have the Meghalaya Investment Promotion Authority, MIPA.
Okay.
And they've been working really hard on these ease of doing business reforms.
Okay.
You know, trying to cut red tape and make it easier for businesses to operate.
Okay, and how successful have they been with that?
Well, they claim that in 2025 alone, they implemented 280 reforms.
Wow.
Up from 0 in 2018.
Okay, so it sounds like they're really making an effort.
They're making an effort.
Yeah.
And are they also creating things like land banks and industrial parks?
Oh, yeah. They're setting up land banks and industrial parks to make it easier for businesses to find suitable locations.
Okay.
Their first big industrial park is a 633-acre park in Tikritila.
Okay. Now, all this sounds great in theory, but are there any real-world examples of investments that have actually happened?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So,
okay, give us some concrete examples.
Sure. So there's this company, Avurn Beverages. They're investing like 300 crore in a new plant in Mendipathar.
Okay.
And that's projected to create 500 jobs.
Okay.
And then there's Lemon Tree Hotels.
Okay.
They've been awarded a 124 crore project to develop the Orchid Hotel in Shillong.
Oh, okay.
And that's through a public-private partnership.
Okay, a PPP.
A PPP. Yeah.
Okay. And are there any other, big projects in the works? Oh, yeah, they're planning 4 new 5-star hotels and luxury resorts.
Okay.
That's about 900 crore of investment.
Wow, okay.
And then there are some, smaller luxury cottage projects worth 52 crore.
Okay.
Also through PPPs.
Okay, so PPPs are a big part of their strategy.
Yeah, they're really using those to leverage private sector investment.
Okay, good. So it sounds like they're making some progress.
Yeah, they say that 1,400 crore of investment has already been grounded, and they have another 2,000 crore in the pipeline across sectors like bamboo, hydropower, and tourism.
Okay, good. So they're not just talking about it.
No, they're actually getting things done.
They're getting things done.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
And on a slightly different note, they also talk about closing down.
Yes.
The Mamlut Sharia Cements Limited.
MCCL, right?
They're closing it down.
Okay.
But they're providing a financial package of 98.25 crore for the employees.
and they're planning to develop tourism infrastructure in that area.
Okay, interesting. So they're trying to create new opportunities.
Repurpose, yeah.
Repurpose that area.
Exactly.
Okay. So moving on to the second opportunity.
Okay.
Agriculture and high-value horticulture.
Yes.
Now this is a big one, right?
It's huge. A big part of their economy.
It is.
Yeah.
What are their key initiatives here?
So their main goal, like a lot of states, is to double farmers' income.
Okay, that's a common goal.
Yeah. And they're claiming that they've already achieved income increases for farmers in some of their programs, ranging from 30% to 80% for things like mushrooms, floriculture. They've also seen a big expansion in the area dedicated to high-value crops in the last 5 years.
Okay. So what are some of the specific programs they have?
So one is called CM Farm Plus.
Okay.
And they're allocating 40 crore for that in the next financial year. And that's focused on providing farmers with quality planting materials and training.
Okay, so it's about improving the inputs.
Yeah.
And then they have the floriculture mission, which is getting 86 crore.
Okay.
And that's supporting farmers to cultivate high-value flowers like orchids.
Okay.
And some farmers are already earning up to 1 lakh per year.
Wow.
From that.
That's significant.
As a supplementary income.
Yeah. So they're not just focused on growing more.
Right.
They're also focused on adding value.
Yeah, they're really emphasizing value addition.
Okay.
So they've set up all these processing units called prime hubs.
Prime hubs.
Oh. They have 164 small ones and 13 large ones.
Okay.
And these prime hubbies, they can handle 8,000 metric tons of produce annually.
Wow.
And they benefit over 10,000 farmers.
Okay. That's a pretty big impact.
It is. And their goal is to have 1 prime hub in each block by 2028.
Okay.
They're also really promoting post-harvest storage. Okay, that's important.
Yeah, because you don't want all that produce to go to waste.
Exactly.
So they've set up 44 cold stored units. And 202 pack houses.
Wow.
In the last 5 years. And they have another 87 warehouses under construction.
Wow. Okay.
And then they have this program called CM Assure, which is providing price support to farmers of Broome and Areca net. So that's helping over 22,000 farmers.
Okay. So they're really trying to provide a safety net.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And overall, what's the budget for the Agriculture and Farmer Welfare Department?
So for next year, it's 618 crore.
Okay.
And that includes a 43% increase in state resources.
Okay. So they're putting their money where their mouth is.
They are.
Okay, good.
Right.
The third opportunity is animal husbandry and livestock.
Right.
What's their approach there?
So they recognize that this is important for both nutrition and income generation.
Makes sense.
So they have a few key initiatives. One is a piggery mission, which is providing interest-free loans to 330 cooperatives.
Okay.
And then they have CM Elevate, which is providing a 50% credit-linked subsidy to 1,357 individuals in the sector.
Okay. So they're supporting both cooperatives and individuals.
Exactly.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah. They're also planning a state-of-the-art veterinary hospital in Upper Shillong.
Okay.
And they're launching the Meghalaya State Aquaculture Mission 3.0.
Okay, aquaculture mission.
Yeah, that's for fish farming.
Okay.
And they're allocating 30 crore for that.
Okay.
And they're hoping to increase fish production to 19,000 metric tons.
Okay.
And benefit 50,000 fish farmers.
Wow. Okay.
And a lot of that is going to be through CM Elevate as well.
Okay, good.
With a 50% subsidy.
Okay, so they're really trying to boost this sector.
They are.
Okay. Now, the fourth opportunity is one that I'm really intrigued by.
Okay.
Sports and creative economy.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
It is. So why this emphasis? Well, they talk about how they've really ramped up their support for sports. Since 2018. Yeah. They've committed 1,500 crore.
Wow.
Compared to just 100 crore in the previous 17 years.
Okay. That's a huge increase.
It is.
So they're really serious about this.
Yeah. They've hosted over 10 national and international sporting events since 2022.
Wow.
And they had their joint highest medal tally at the recent national games.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And they're actually going to be hosting the 39th national games in 2027.
Wow, okay.
So they're expecting to spend about 1,900 crore on sports infrastructure in the next 3 years.
Okay, so that's a big commitment.
Yeah, and they have this big project, the Makanu Football Complex.
Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's going to be a 40,000 capacity stadium
Wow.
costing 732 crore.
Wow.
And they really want to make Meghalaya the football capital of India.
Okay.
This is a big part of that.
So they're thinking big here.
Yeah, they're not just investing in the elite level, though. They're also putting a lot of money into grassroots infrastructure.
Okay, good.
So 25 new artificial turfs, 140 grassroots centers, grants to clubs, support for events.
Okay, so they're really trying to create a whole ecosystem.
Exactly.
Okay, good. And are they doing anything on the creative economy side?
Yeah, so they have this state-owned OTT platform called Hello Meghalaya.
Okay.
And they're providing incentives for filmmakers and digital content creators.
Okay, interesting.
And they also have this Meghalaya grassroots music program, which has already dispersed 18 crore.
Good.
So they're allocating a total of 35 crore for these programs in 2025 to 26.
Okay, good. So it's a mix of, supporting both
sports and creative industry.
Exactly, yeah. Okay. The fifth opportunity is entrepreneurship and skilling.
Yes.
Now, how are they fostering a supportive ecosystem for new businesses and for workforce development?
Well, they have this program called Prime, which has incubated 200 startups, funded 400 entrepreneurs, and provided support to 280 rural businesses.
Okay. That's impressive.
Yeah, and they also have these urban Prime hubs.
Okay.
Which are like co-working spaces and stuff.
Okay, got it. Anything else?
Yeah, they have another program called CM Elevate.
Okay.
And this one provides financial support, ranging from 35% to 75% subsidy.
Okay, that's significant.
It is.
Okay.
And they've approved 2,840 projects this year alone.
Okay.
With a total cost of over 146 crore and 86 crore in subsidies.
Okay.
So between Prime and CM Elevate, they've created over 10,000 jobs.
Wow.
And supported over 8,000 entrepreneurs.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and they're working with 25 educational institutions and over 30 partners.
Okay, so it's a real collaborative effort.
It is.
Okay, and on the skilling side, what are they doing?
So they have this initiative called Skills Meghalaya, which trained 18,800 people in 2024-25.
Okay.
And 1,777 of those people secured jobs with an average additional income of 1 lakh.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and they're setting up these state-of-the-art skills and innovation hubs in New Shillong and Tura.
Okay.
And they've also successfully placed 60 nurses overseas.
Wow, okay. So they're really trying to connect people with opportunities.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else on the skilling front?
Expert